Welcome back to my channel. This week we are going to be diving into the shadow. So if you are a person who can't figure out why people are projecting onto you, why you are projecting onto other people, or if you're being ruled by autonomous impulses and you can't figure out why you keep self-sabotaging, this video is for you. So let's dive into it. What is the shadow? So this is a term that many people throw around. You've probably heard this in some pop psychology circles, people talking about doing shadow work, getting in and understanding what that is. Well, we're going to go all the way back to the basics and we're just going to define it from the ground up. So some of you may have heard of Carl Gustav Jung. I am pretty much obsessed with Jung, and I must admit I'm pretty new to his work. I've been studying him for a little over a year, and as far as I'm concerned, what he was able to put into the world is pure truth, capital T, truth. This is a concept developed and defined by Jung to explain the unconscious aspects of ourselves that we have cut off. So what does that mean? Well, I want to start by giving a couple of key elements to what the shadow is, okay, and how we understand it. So first off, the shadow lives in the unconscious, meaning we are not necessarily aware of its influence in our life. There is also a personal shadow and a collective shadow. I'm going to talk about what the collective shadow looks like here in just a moment. Importantly as well, the shadow is represented in archetypal patterns and symbols, similar to dreams, to experiences where your unconscious is speaking to you through dream work, which is symbols, sensations. The shadow is often expressed and accessed through studying archetypes. Archetypes is just a fancy word for an idea, a character, or a place that kind of represents something that we all understand. So in story, we have the archetype of the hero. We have the archetype of the wise king. We have the archetype of the benevolent mother. We have the archetype of the jealous lover. So these are all archetypes that we can fit different characters in from different stories, different myth, different places. Back to key elements for the shadow. Huge part here. Integrating the shadow is a necessary part of individuation. And when I say individuation, I mean the process of becoming the most authentic expression of yourself. So what gets in the way of that? Our conditioning, our shadow qualities, and trying to fit into boxes that perhaps we don't belong in. When I said there's personal and collective unconscious, the collective unconscious is like all people for all time are putting out energy, thinking, thoughts, patterns, and we're all contributing and we're all ruled by that in some way. So the collective unconscious is made up of archetypes, which are innate, universal symbols and images that shape human experiences and perceptions. These archetypes represent common themes found in different cultures and historical periods. I'm going to quote these directly from a person who I really admire. His name is James Hollis. He's a Jungian analyst and writer and author. He writes a lot about the shadow, and I'm going to put a couple of book recommendations in the description of this video. So this is what James Hollis says in regards to integrating the shadow. The key to integration of the shadow, the unlived life, is to understand that its demands emanate from the self, which wishes neither further repression nor unlicensed acting out. The integration of the shadow requires that we live responsibly in society, but also more honestly with ourselves. We learn through the deflation of the persona world that we have lived provisionally. The integration of inner truths, joyful or unpleasant, is necessary to bring new life and the restoration of purpose. So what is he saying? He's saying that the key to integrating the shadow is to come into contact with it, to be okay with accessing things that you might learn about yourself that are unpleasant, or to acknowledge and take accountability for behavior and recognize that you are not all good, you are not all bad. You are the totality of the human experience. Let's talk a little bit about how the shadow shows up and rules our life. I'm only going to get into two of the modalities here. I run a course that I'll give you more info on later that I get into all four of the shadow modalities and how those show up in our lives. So let's talk about the first one, which is remaining unconscious. So this is how a lot of us walk around. Jung wrote that the greatest burden a child has to bear is the unlived life of their parents. Based on my experience examining my own life and the experience of my clients, I am all in on this. We underestimate how powerful the example of our parents is. When he's saying the greatest burden a child has to bear is the unlived life of the parent, you can imagine that when you grow up and your template for what a functioning healthy human is only what your parents are showing you, you can imagine how constrained your imagination gets. You can't think beyond that template. And so unconsciously you grow into that template, and then you're not willing to grow beyond it because you're stifled by that example that you've seen. There are other places where this happens, where we tend to serve, overcompensate, or spend a lifetime trying to break free of it. How many people are watching this video and you had to resist a powerful impulse to follow the same career path that your parents laid out for you? That's a very common one that many of us experience. Or how many of you look at your parents and you say, oh, well, I am not that. And so you've created a persona in direct contradiction to them so that you can say that I am this not thing, which the irony is you're still being ruled by the image of what they are or what they were, and you're battling against that. Or we just full on sever from it and we say, I'm leaving, right? Like, how many of us can only separate from the wants, needs, desires of our parents by creating a lot of space between us and them? This is how people get estranged from their families, which is very, very common these days. Often where the parent got stuck is where we get stuck. The parent lived into a life. They got stuck at a certain point. They couldn't transcend whatever developmental milestones were being placed in front of them. And we unconsciously reenact that pattern. James Hollis writes here that anything short of serving our deepest spiritual nature typically becomes a shadow issue for any of us. That is a huge undertaking, right? The deepest spiritual nature. I can't think of really a larger undertaking than that. But the point he is making here is anytime you are reenacting the behavior that the people that came before you gave you to seek love, to seek approval, because you've been told directly or indirectly that you can only be loved and accepted when you operate within these parameters. That's what he's talking about here. That's what gets in the way of us serving our deepest spiritual nature. That's how it remains unconscious. Another way that it shows up in people's lives is projection. This is a huge one. So how many of you have heard like, oh, he's just projecting, or she's just projecting, or someone tells you, stop projecting onto me? What does that mean? So projection, this is how James Hollis defines it, and I love this definition. So he says, projection is when my triggered psyche sends energy into the world, and since it's unconscious, I don't know that it happened. Think of an example where you're looking at somebody and all of a sudden you're casting a judgment on them, and you're not even sure why you're casting judgment on them. This is what he's talking about. Something in their behavior, their demeanor, their countenance triggered something in your psyche, and you've now projected this onto them as like an inherent character about them that you don't like, which the irony is it's probably a characteristic about you that you don't like. This is helpful in allowing us to distance ourselves from our shadow. So if I look at somebody and I say, oh, look how greedy he is, or look how that guy earns $500,000 a year working, like, look how obsessed with work he is. He works 80 hours a week. Likely that is a triggered psyche in me saying, oh, I wish I had that much money. I am jealous of the things that he has, and I'm going to create a reason why I am better than him for not having that. That's projection. We derive pleasure in that false moral superiority because it's false. We're creating like a straw man character to hold our shadow so we can project onto them and say, well, at least I'm not that. We make the other carried our disowned parts. So the opportunity here when we're projecting is say, what if I looked at my own greed or my own jealousy? Oh, this is coming up in that person when I watch them. What is that? Where does that characteristic reside in me? Why is that judgment put onto them? And if you take that seriously, you will really begin to learn a lot about yourself. I wanted to put a note in here too about collective projection. This is, again, the collective unconsciousness. How does this show up? Well, it shows up in bigotry, judgment, historical ethnic cleansing. Our incapacity to tolerate otherness within ourselves means that we are unable to tolerate that other in somebody else. Most of the horrors in human history are based off of unconscious collective projection. James Hollis writes this, and I think this perfectly encapsulates this. How many times have armies marched off to war singing a hymn that God is on our side? We are righteous because we march against the infidel. So both sides have othered the other and created the shadow projection and justified why they must get rid of them or destroy whatever it is they're seeking to destroy. Excuse me, I'm going to read this quote from James Hollis. This is long, so bear with me, but it's really, really powerful. This is from a book titled A Life of Meaning, and Hollis writes, quote, Jung frequently reminded us that our task in life is not goodness, but wholeness. Now, I don't know about you, but I never heard anything like that when I was a child, and I wish I had. Like most children, whenever I had what I would consider a shadow thought, fantasy, or hope, I immediately felt awful about it because of the weight of the collective expectation to always be good. When that happened, I believed goodness alone was the task. It was what I had to do. Pieces of one's life are pushed aside, projected onto others, or dropped back into the unconscious, where they will sooner or later act autonomously. So when Jung said wholeness is a task, we face quite a different story for our lives. He writes profoundly about how we need to explore all aspects of our life, the body, desire, and moral exploration, and not out of a selfish, narcissistic agenda. I don't mean to suggest, nor did Jung, an unfettered license to any moral choice. Rather, this is about responsibly knowing that all choices lie within me, and I am accountable for their entry into the world. If I am going to deal with what is wrong in the world, I have to deal with what is wrong in me first. So what is he telling us there? He is telling us that the fundamental task of being a human is not being good. It is being whole. And this is a paradigm shifting experience for a lot of people. I sit with clients every day, and one of the most healing experiences a client can have is when they are seen in their quote unquote badness and still loved and accepted. We are conditioned for a number of reasons why we have to be good or why we have to be right. And what Hollis is telling us and what Jung told us is that we have to get into contact with those bad parts. We have to be able to sit with them, acknowledge them, and we have to understand that that does not make us less than. So I have a lot of clients who are high performing professional people. And in that world, they have very strict definitions of success or failure. They're usually based off numbers. They're based off how much can I earn? Did I meet that goal or did I not? And this thing happens over and over again where they come in and they say, I did not meet my goal. And that spirals them out because now they've been put into contact with their badness. Okay, I'm inadequate. I didn't do enough. I didn't reach my goals. They've been told you are only good enough. They've been told directly or indirectly, you are only good enough if you reach these goals. And so they've internalized that belief. And when the shadow quality comes up and forces them to confront, hey, maybe you weren't good enough, it is a completely existential meltdown because their ego wants to believe, well, I am only good, I am only successful, I am always achieving. The irony is that's an impossible ideal. And in order to maintain that expectation of a life, you inherently have to repress all of the bad. And through that repression, you end up with chronic illness. You end up sick. You end up with really shitty relationships because you're projecting on everybody else, because the things inside of you that bother you, you can't look at. And so you other them. You put them out into the universe, and then you keep a safe distance from them and project your shit onto them. And I think if you can probably relate to those experiences. And if you can't, you're really lucky. I want to make two more points here. I want to first talk about how the shadow shows up in media. This is really interesting and fascinating to me. So our culture, I live in the United States of America. We idolize creators, influencers, luminaries. We put them up on a pedestal and essentially other them, which is interesting because that's often a projection of the positive shadow, which I'll talk about more in a minute. We also have violence, gore, anger made manifest in most of our popular forms of media. So why is that? Have you ever asked yourself, why can I go and watch Die Hard and watch Bruce Willis kill 100 people in a matter of 90 minutes and derive pleasure in that? That is saying we have projected our need for violence, anger, rage, retribution, and vengeance into this character. And this character holds that otherness for us so that we can get in contact with it without being overwhelmed by it. We also have villains. Like the depth of villainous portrayal in popular TV these days is just so well done. You can think of a character like Walter White in Breaking Bad, who like starts off as like everyday guy, chemistry teacher in high school, and you watch his descent into darkness. And the reason that is so compelling is because these authors, these creators, are showing you that this wholeness exists in this white bread chemistry teacher, and it also exists in you. And through viewing that, you're kind of forced to confront that, and you relate. Oh, hey, maybe I would do that if I were put in that situation as well. That's getting in contact with the shadow. We need these outlets because we need to be put into contact with them. When we project onto these forms of media, we know that that shadow exists outside of ourselves. Hollis gives an example about Las Vegas, the classic saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Vegas is the complete epitome of debauchery and hedonism, and excess. And it exists out there in the desert in Nevada. And we can rest safe knowing, oh, I can go to bed every night, and that is held somewhere else. Well-respected, well-adjusted people from all over the world go to Vegas for a weekend where they can indulge in that debauchery and that excess. And that is allowing the shadow to speak through them. I want to finish this video up by just talking briefly about the positive shadow, because this is an important piece, okay? So I'm just going to give you an example. Imagine a young man exuding kindness and empathy, and he grows up in a family that asserts values like assertiveness and independence. His family insists on the importance of being tough and self-reliant, and they closely scrutinize all of the decisions that he makes. So despite his natural inclination toward kindness, these are qualities that are not appreciated in his family. So gradually, he starts to suppress kindness and empathy, and he rejects these positive qualities in himself. In order to gain the approval and the love that he wants from his parents and his caregivers, he denies himself that compassion and that understanding. And as he matures, he internalizes the belief that he's only worthy of love if he's a tough, self-reliant, making decisions independently. This internal conflict leads to a lot of emotional pain because he struggles with the dichotomy inside of himself. He's got his true nature who wants to express himself, and then the persona, the character he's had to create to receive the love and acceptance that he wants in his life. But in adulthood, he encounters someone who guides him in exploring his unconscious feelings and beliefs. And this person helps him activate his positive shadow, revealing that his true essence includes kindness and empathy. Once that is consciously made accessible, he's able to reclaim these aspects of himself. He rediscovers that kindness and empathy that he has suppressed, and now feels fully capable of creating a life aligned with his authentic values without seeking approval from others. He has brought his wholeness into the picture, where he had to exile what we would consider good qualities in order to meet the expectation of his caregivers. That's how we express the positive shadow, or access the positive shadow. And that's how it shows up. You might notice, you look at people around you, maybe you idolize somebody for a specific thing that they're capable of doing. And you might not realize that that's a quality you have that through whatever your conditioning is, you've actually had to repress. And so you project that onto them. And so that's beautiful because, again, it's not all negative. We get to look around our world and figure out what are the judgments I'm making about the people around me? Are they negative? Are they things that I can't look at myself? Are they really positive? Are they things that I know exist within me, but I'm not willing to give them the space and time I need to express them? That takes a profound amount of courage to go against the grain of the way that you were conditioned. That's what I got on the shadow. I hope that inspires a little bit of thinking, or maybe a different way of looking at your life and the people around you. This is important work, and you hear shadow work thrown around all the time. In many situations, I think that's valuable. In some situations, I kind of think it's a pop psych term that has been diluted just through overuse. But I encourage you to drop into it. I'm putting some book recommendations in the description of this video that will help bring you in contact with the shadow and help make it a little bit more, just deepen your understanding so you're able to see how that shows up in your life. Thanks again, as always, for watching. I appreciate your time and sharing your most valuable resource with me, your attention. I hope to see you next week.